This week on Conservative Crossroads, the war with Iran. Is it in America's best interest? Rebeccah Heinrichs says yes. Curt says no. The war with Iran, coming up on Conservative Crossroads. Now. Welcome back to Conservative Crossroads, the podcast where conservatives lean into their differences rather than dismiss them. I'm Henry Olson, Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and your host for this episode. Our topic today is the Iran war. Is it good or bad for United States interest? Rebeccah Heinrichs, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute, thinks it is in America's interest, while Curt, Executive Director at the American Conservative, thinks it is not. Each person will have 5 minutes to present their opening views and explain them for the audience. They'll then mutually question each other for about 40 minutes, and then we will go in reverse order with 2 minutes for closing statements. We determined at the outset of the episode that Curt will go first. Curt, you're up.
Thanks. Look, I think it's incumbent upon us to examine the counterfactual. So just imagine the United States had not engaged in this war starting on February 28th. Imagine the United States had not undertaken the 12-day war in June of 2025. Imagine if the United States had seen through the negotiations last spring, everything that already happened between the Iranians and the United States, everything that had already happened between the Iranians and this president of the United States. There was a deal on offer in April of 2025, which was better than Barack Obama's JCPOA. There was rumors of basically above ground inspections, a lower enrichment number than Obama consented to. And I think it's just incumbent upon defenders of the war why we should have walked away from that deal. Why couldn't we have come to an understanding with what is effectively a third-rate power, a power in a part of the world where the United States has had no luck the last quarter century plus, and why Iran was such a crisis now. The administration has frankly lied that it was an imminent threat. In their most candid moments, the days after the war, they all but admitted that this is a war on behalf of a certain conception of Israeli interest. I think we should take the government at its word. We are in this war by hook or by crook on behalf of the Israelis. That does not mean that this is exonerates the president of the United States from decision-making. I'm not going to play a bad czar, good boyar routine. The Israelis set the table and the president ate the meal. But the question is, don't you think, all things being equal, that Donald Trump could have undone this decision? What exactly is the case that this war is going well? This is by far and quite quickly the most unpopular war in American history, more than Iraq, more than Vietnam. And moreover, if you think the United States needs to reassess its strategy from a foreign policy perspective from the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, the kind of argument that Donald Trump won the presidency on, I hesitate to say that we shouldn't be doing more of the same. We shouldn't be doing more of the same and then some. This is Gulf War III. In a lot of ways, it's not like Iraq. In a lot of ways, it's worse. This is a regionalized war. This is a war that is affecting the global economy. And this is the war that is affecting a specific political project within the United States. It's not a secret, and I don't want to make this about politics or domestic politics. It's not a secret that the American system is somewhat unstable. It's not a secret that the broader, quote, West has been roiled by populist politics. And what are those anxieties? Those anxieties are that we have become too multicultural, too diverse too quickly, that our society is highly unequal and oligarchic, that we are fighting a lot of foreign wars that aren't interested in Americans' bottom lines and their own national interests. And that, anxiety goes from everywhere from San Francisco to Eastern Europe. And for the Republican center-right populist parties to basically signal, if you give us the keys to the castle, if you don't want woke, if you don't want DEI, the price of that is basically administrations that expand the deficit and administrations that engage in more foreign wars. That's a terrible argument for the United States, and it's also a terrible argument for center-right parties in Europe, who have, I think, sagely distance themselves from this war, but not far enough, because the critical quotient is whether or not the U.S. and Europe are ever willing to meaningfully break with the Israelis. Or at least this Israeli government, but honestly, any fathomable Israeli government for the foreseeable future. I don't think his potential successor, his predecessor, Naftali Bennett, would be all that different than Benjamin Netanyahu. I think he'd probably be less crooked and chaotic. But they have similar designs on getting the U.S. in a war in Turkey next. I think we should take this stuff very seriously. The Iranians aren't convenient for the United States. The U.S. has messed up Iranian policy since at least the 70s, if not the 50s. But let's not relitigate, 75 years of history on this call. But the U.S. could have come to a pragmatic understanding with the Islamic Republic, and one that would allow the U.S. to focus on its own domestic renewal. And if the U.S. has any threat, has any pure competitor, any rival, it's China. And I think the reality is that this played right into China's hands. I know there's been hawk arguments that it hasn't, but the Chinese look like the mature, responsible, predictable power compared to us right now. And I think we should all be ashamed. Thank you.
Rebeccah, your opening statement.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for having us do this. I really appreciate the opportunity. So a couple of things. One, I think that President Trump actually was very much open to diplomacy with the Iranians. He clearly wanted to solve the Iranian problem through diplomatic means and to avoid military conflict, if at all possible. What is the Iranian problem? I think President Trump and his entire administration has been very, very clear that the nature of the regime, such as it is, the Islamic Republic, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in particular, should not have the ability to coerce the United States with a nuclear capability. It could be even a latent nuclear capability proved to be too much of a coercive problem for the United States. But it wasn't just the nuclear program. The fact that the Islamic regime has been the most active state sponsor of terrorism throughout the region for the last several decades was also a constant problem, not just for the United States, but for our allies throughout the region. So it was the nuclear program, it was the terrorism program, its funding and training of the proxies, and of course, the regime's ability then to project power outside its borders. So notice I haven't even mentioned the problem that the Iranians pose to our allies, the Israelis. This is a problem for the United States of America. Geopolitically, in the larger scheme of things, Iran is also a partner of China. China still does pose the greatest capacity to do the greatest harm to the United States, but China does not act alone. It is acting in something of a loose axis: China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, and then, of course, the narco-terrorist states in our own hemisphere. But Iran did pose a serious, grave problem for the United States. It wasn't just the assessment of this current American government. Its predecessors agreed with that. President Obama really took advantage of the pressure campaign that was built up around Iran to try to get some kind of diplomatic solution to the illegal nuclear program. Of course, that was the JCPOA. According to the Obama administration officials, it didn't, if you just look and compare what the original diplomats of the Obama administration sought with the regime, it didn't achieve those. And so it wasn't a good deal. Just going to list off a few of them without getting overly technical. It didn't include terrorism and its proxies. It didn't include the ballistic missile program. It didn't have anywhere, anytime inspections of the program. It did have sunsets. And so because of this, it wasn't a good deal. But the argument that those who were promoting the deal made was that if we didn't have this deal, this was as good as we could get. The alternative wasn't just war, it was catastrophic war, that Iran was so capable that any kind of military conflict with the Iranians would be catastrophic for the United States. So you fast forward, the President Trump, I think, rightly made the decision that the deal was bad. We flooded the regime with cash in the form of sanctions relief for this deal that did not actually seize and stop the program. The Iranians did continue working on their nuclear program. President Trump engaged in diplomacy again, attempted to with the regime. The regime wouldn't cooperate with the United States. After Midnight Hammer, the nuclear program was significantly degraded, but the Iranians were not chastened. So they began working on their missile defense, or their integrated air and missile defense with the Chinese, and they began trying to reconstruct their nuclear program. So President Trump, I think, made the decision that we had a moment of opportunity while the regime was significantly weakened after the United States with the Israelis significantly degraded the program, degraded their air defenses, degraded their missile force, and so really seized the moment of opportunity to go in and conduct epic fury. What have we gotten so far? Further degraded the leadership. We've achieved dominance over the battlefield. And then Admiral Cooper, of course, the commander of Central Command, has confirmed that, I think the most important data point, 2/3 of their missile production capability has been destroyed. So the United States, I think, is in a very good position, especially with the blockade in place, economic pressure, once again, on the regime. But we have significantly achieved so much. I think the American people are far safer now with the regime on its back foot. There's still much to do to, I think, achieve a political outcome that is lasting, that we can all agree puts the United States in a really good spot for a longer term, and that is to be determined. But we're safer now than we were before Epic Fury was commenced.
Okay. Well, who wants to go first in exchanging a question to the other person?
I'm happy to do that.
Sure.
Curt, so what would you say is, after Epic Fury has commenced and the United States did achieve significant battlefield success, what would you argue? I mean, how would you counter the argument that the United States has significantly degraded the Navy, the Air Force, their missile capacity, the leadership? I mean, would you at least agree that the Iran regime is significantly weaker and has far less capability to threaten the United States outside its borders?
No. I mean, I guess there's two different questions. I mean, one's the tactics, and one's the strategy. And my understanding is we're trying to avoid the tactics here, but I think they can rebuild their missile capabilities pretty easily. And I think that we've basically created a more hardline regime that is more likely to lunge for a bomb no matter what happens at the resolution of this war. So I don't think that makes it safer at all. I think the world is more dangerous. I think people are more afraid to go to the region and invest in the Gulf and travel through that part of the world. I think we've created a world in which our vulnerabilities are obvious and evident. And I think we, as others have observed, are hastening the end of the American empire, which, I mean, in some ways may be a good thing, but I don't think it's necessarily in the interim making Americans safer. The question has never been, can we take out a country like Iran? We can take out a country like Rwanda or the Congo. We could take out Germany if we needed to. The question is why? The question is to what end? We took out Saddam Hussein. We took out Saddam Hussein's Republican Guard. We dismantled the Ba'athist state. Congratulations. Was that good for the United States? Do you think that was a good decision? Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something.
Okay, I just want to respond to that. So I find it really interesting because those who oppose the war simultaneously make two arguments. They make the argument that the Iranians are far, far stronger than what the United States could possibly deal with. That it's a massive country, that they would be able to reproduce their missiles, that they'd be able to reproduce their drone facilities. And they also make the argument that it's a weak country, and that yes, we could easily go in and destroy the capability, but we would harden the regime. And so I just think that there's these just two competing views of what the Iran regime was. And I think that we should understand what it. I mean, it was a regime that was highly ideological. I don't know where this notion is that we're going to somehow make the IRGC even more hardened. The IRGC is a committed committed to the regime, to the Islamic Revolution, and I mean, this notion that they're going to become even more terrorists than they already are. I mean, they're already perfectly happy to have civilians killed for the sake of the revolution. They're perfectly happy to murder tens of thousands of Iranians in the streets for the sake of the revolution. They're perfectly happy to have their economy crushed for the sake of the revolution. So there's no question that this is a highly ideological regime. But they need more than ideology, they need capability. So my question is about capability. And the Iranians have clearly not been able to push back any significant way against the United States in combination with our great allies, the Israelis, who have demonstrated incredible military competency, not just military capability, but military competency. So I think that President Trump's initiation of this war really blew open the myth that the United States was simply not able to handle this problem militarily. That it has not been just objectively speaking a militarily catastrophic war for the United States. It's been remarkable. And last point on this, when the United States went in and rescued those F-16 airmen inside Iran, we also demonstrated total dominance, not just air superiority, but over the Iranians in our ability to even rescue those two downed airmen, once again demonstrating overmatch in terms of our military competency. So I think it's important that we at least acknowledge the reality of what the United States has been able to militarily achieve. And then the question for me is, and I readily admit this, is how do we get a political outcome that is lasting using such military competency and capabilities, not just with the Israelis, but our Gulf partners, and by the way, the Europeans. Even though their political leaders do not support the war, privately, the Europeans are still providing help and access to basing and overflight air defenses to the Gulf states and to the United States operating in the region.
Can I respond to any of that, or how we handle this, Henry?
You can respond to that if you want. You can ask a question if you'd like.
I'll respond briefly, and then I'll ask her a question, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah. There are tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people who oppose this war. So they all say different things. I mean, the reason I oppose this war is different than the reason the Iranian state opposes this war. I do think an interesting sleight of hand there that you think this government has changed. I mean, I think the regime, the sun is in charge, or the sun is the figurehead, and the IRGC was in charge before the war, and they're war in charge now. So I think it's the same government. I think it's a specious line of argument by the administration. And I think the people outside the administration who are defending the war should do better than regurgitating an obvious lie. The question is, you're having a conversation with me. What am I saying? I don't think it really matters what the Iranian capabilities are. We're supposed to talk about strategy here. So I think they are more capable than probably the DC consensus. That's part of the reason I opposed the war. I think they've way overperformed in this war based on where people were, say, in October or June of last year. But yeah, like if the United States wants to use all of its political capital and all of its resources to take down the Iranian regime, cool, we can do it. I just think that's bad, and we shouldn't. There's better use of our time and our resources. And moreover, what has been the lesson of the war on terror? Winning a war doesn't really matter. You got to win the peace. And if we replace this regime, what do we replace it with? Part of the Israeli state's plan is to slice and dice the place, dissect it. Is that in the U.S. national interest to Syrianize Iran? I don't really think so. I think our Israeli partners want state collapse more than they want regime collapse, and I just don't think that's in the U.S. national interest. I think we can talk about military tactics all day. I have no doubt that the U.S. military is the most capable in the world. Again, it's a matter of where we should use it. I think this is a government that has obviously a Shia 12er form of Islamism governing it. But I think there's a willful conflation and preying on the ignorance of frankly, a lot of Americans about the differences here. This is not Al-Qaeda. This is not a Sunni millenarian terrorist organization. This is an enemy that was this is a country that was an avowed enemy of ISIS. The Iranian proxies were Shia militias in Iraq wanted to surrender to U.S. forces, not to the Iranians, because the Iranians summarily executed them. We're not friends with these people, but I think we could be durable, pragmatic, as needed partners in the region to avoid a war. I'll flip it to a question. I really don't mean this, and please don't take this as a gotcha. But Rebeccah, I'm familiar with your work, and I know that you were, original sort of national security conservative, never Trumper signatory person. And that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. I was an early OG Trump supporter, July 2015 on Ask Around. What amount of political capital are we willing to spend on this? This is a war that supermajorities of Americans oppose. As of today, in the prediction markets, the Democrats are favored to take the Senate. I think they may win states as disparate as Texas. Is this really worth it? And, I don't want to rehash what Trump said or didn't say, or maybe the anti-war right got hoodwinked, or maybe they wanted to see too much into it. But Trump didn't run on, I'm going to be George W. Bush 3.0. That's fine if that's the Hudson Institute's prerogative and what they want. But I think that's not the pitch that he made to American voters or to
All right, Curt.
Yeah, that's my
All right, Curt. I don't speak for Hudson Institute. I speak for myself. And we're not supposed to get into politics, but I will say I did not support President Trump in the original primary. But I think he was, his foreign policy has been largely extremely good. And I would just note, because I think this is important since we're debating in a conservative context as well, that I did not vote, unlike some members of this president's administration, for Evan McMullin, for instance. I did support the Republican candidate in the general election when President Trump was running. And so I think he's been remarkably good, and he's been a great surprise in foreign policy. So, but I will say a few things. Part of what matters whenever you're trying to assess an enemy of the United States is you assess their ideology or their motive to do harm to you, and then you assess their capability. So it absolutely matters to understand the ideological motivations of this regime. You essentially just said that the American people have been, I believe you said, hoodwinked into believing that this regime is something like ISIS. And I would submit to you, it is. That the Islamic Republic has supported the Houthis, Hamas, all kinds of proxies that have killed American citizens, who have sought to harm American citizens, our troops, our allies. And by the way, part of what has kept presidents from intervening, using military force against the illicit nuclear program, is because of the Islamic Revolution's threat to close the Strait of Hormuz, 20% of global energy shipping through the strait. And so it was using that coercively. And the United States of America, I think, the duty of any president, any administration, is to make sure that the American people and the American way of life is secure, defended, and to maximize our sovereignty to move in the world on terms that benefit the American people. And the Islamic Republic of Iran continued to threaten that. President Trump, again, tried diplomacy like his predecessors. But at the end of the day, diplomacy only matters and can be successful to the extent we have a credible threat of military force. And so we got to the end to the talking, and we have used military force, still trying to get to a diplomatic solution. And I think that has great deterrent value for other threats across the world. And we can get to that too, because I would be curious to talk about how this does affect other state actors as well. And I do think, because of President Trump's initiation of epic fury against Iran, and then also the Maduro raid, that combined we have, if we can make both of those countries not so hostile, but at least compliant to the United States and not threatening, and not being essentially proxies for China, that takes off about, both of those two countries combined provided about 17 to 20% of Chinese energy imports, which is significant. It increases America's geopolitical advantage versus China, which I think is a good thing.
I guess one of the questions I want to jump in with is, how do we get to this, this deal, which I call victory, because we've had a lot of deals in various conflicts that have not produced the outcome that the United States wanted. If the goal of the United States, and I'll put this to Rebeccah, and then I'll ask a variation of this to Curt, if the goal of the United States is to end the revolutionary nature of the Iranian regime, not to split up Iran, not even necessarily to eliminate the religious aspect of it, but to end the revolutionary nature of the regime, its terrorist support network, and its ability to project power through the nuclear program. How do we turn the military advantage into that, Rebeccah?
Well, I think it's going to take a lot. It's going to take different things. I mean, one of the first things, and I think that this is where the administration could do even better at communicating. I mean, people forget that the supreme leader viewed himself as the global leader of Shia Islam, and the fact that the United States, with the Israelis, have eliminated him in leadership. I mean, that's a significant ideological blow to the regime and to what it was sought to do. Now, supposedly, his son is still alive somewhere. We only know that through reporting. We have not had that confirmed, but that is significant. There's a psychological center of gravity that I think has been significantly degraded. The IRGC is not listening to the political leadership, so the regime is fractured. And that's significant, again, because they have to be committed to the revolution based on some sort of idea that they are the rightful sort of religious group to control things. So it's going to take some time, but that's why I think that you focus on, as a matter of strategy, you want to focus on their capability to make good on the revolution, which is the part that we're doing. And then I think we talked a little bit about this before we started having this conversation. I think we are going to resume military operations because the IRGC is not listening to the political leadership who the United States is seeking to negotiate with. Those people, according to Secretary Rubio, they might not be moderates in the way we think about them, but they are more pragmatic in terms of their ability to assess risk and make better decisions. Those are the people the United States wants to work with. And so I think that we're going to have to continue to degrade the IRGC so that we can have more, people who are more willing to understand that they're not going to fight their way out of this successfully. So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but I do think it gets us closer to a limited, achievable outcome in the near term, rather than sort of this amorphous theoretical idea of winning this war of ideas over time with a very radical regime.
So, Curt, let me just kind of pose the inverse of that question. What is the American interest with, we're in this war that you didn't want. How do we end it in a way so that your definition of victory, your definition of what American interests is sustained? It sounds to me, as a corollary to that your view was that it was always going to be a radical regime, and that the idea of removing the radicalness of the regime, the revolutionary, was always a pipe dream. And that you've actually made the question worse. How do we get to the state that you want to be in with respect to where the United States finds itself now?
I mean, it's a radical regime in the sense of their government is not Jeffersonian democracy. It's not what we would recognize here in the United States. It's not something that I would advocate for in the United States. I think it's sort of a Cold War holdover. And it's an experiment since 1979 in clerical leadership, more or less, mixed with a military wing, a Praetorian Guard, if you prefer, that's getting more and more powerful. I just don't necessarily know how that threatens the United States, a part of the world that's thousands and thousands of miles away. And to the extent that we are, no American has ever been killed on the American homeland by an Iranian government official, by an Iranian proxy. This is not Al Qaeda, it's not ISIS. I reiterate. Rebeccah is going to point out that American citizens have been killed by Hamas. Yeah, in Israel. Yeah, dual citizens with Israel have been, and I think this is another reason why it's problematic to have dual citizenship in general, but particularly for a country like Israel. Don't want to get hemmed in on that, but I just want to stipulate that I understand what I think she's going to say. And I'm aware of it, regardless if it's not, I'm aware of the argument. So, but I think it's interesting now that we are arguing that there are indeed moderates within the Iranians. It's something Rebeccah just said, or there's something all but approximating that, which was fundamentally an argument that was used, not necessarily by Rebeccah to my memory, but by others who said, we couldn't deal with this regime at all. There were no moderates. It was all the same. We're actually creating the sort of Frankenstein's monster, which people said, existed 10 years ago. We are hardening this regime. And so I think at this point, as someone who believes in diplomacy, there was a chance to do it with the Iranians in 25. There was a chance to do this with them in February of 26. We have shown that we use military force. We've killed Iranian leaders. We've killed Iranian negotiators in the middle of the negotiations. Congratulations. I guess we can run like a pirate nation or a mafia state. We've done it. But I think at this point, from the point of view from both America and President Trump's own personal interests, I would just leave. I would just leave and declare victory. I think the Europeans and the global community can clean up our mess. And I think, all things being equal, what the Iranians want on the Strait of Hormuz, which is now under Iranian control and wasn't in the status quo antebellum, is they want $1 on every barrel of oil. Oil fluctuations for 60 plus days have been $10, $20, $30 a barrel of oil a day, up or down. So that doesn't seem like much of a price of peace at all. So I still think we can avoid further war and further bloodshed by just coming home. And I think that's perfectly safe for Americans. I think that's safer than continuing the war. I think we are going to probably escalate. I think the logic is basically there. I think Trump doesn't want to be out of the show. I don't think the assembly of factors that pushed him into the war or made him make the decision have changed at all. So I think he will escalate. And I think that's a tragedy for the United States. I think it's a tragedy for the United States if we eventually overthrow this regime, because I don't know what we're going to replace it with. And, to take past examples, if we don't learn from history, forget history, we don't learn from this century, from my own adult lifetime, what are we doing here? The Taliban is in charge of Afghanistan today. Wouldn't it have been a lot easier to just make a deal with the Taliban in 2001 and secure our very narrow national interests in those regions and come home? And I think we should do that today before repeating the mistakes of history. But that's me.
So,
Henry, can I just?
Oh, you can go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, I just want to point out, because I think it deserves a very strong pushback, that Curt literally hand waved the notion that Hamas killed American citizens because he said they were dual citizens.
They have. They were killed. They were killed. They were killed abroad. Americans were killed by Iranian proxies in Iraq. We shouldn't be supporting this Israeli government, and we shouldn't have invaded Iraq. But the idea that Americans have anything to fear in the status quo ante-bellum by the Ayatollah, by the IRGC on the American homeland is a willful conflation, and preying, frankly, on the ignorance of people who don't know the difference between Al Qaeda and the IRGC.
I think that this is just an important difference in terms of assumptions that the two of us have. So I do take issue with the fact that we have an enemy of the United States that does chant death to America, death to Israel, one of our closest allies, and is willing to fund terrorist proxies throughout the region, and is willing to kill Americans that they can reach. I still think that is something that is every American should take issue with. It doesn't. They do not need to be specifically killing Americans in your backyard to care that American citizens representing the American flag are still intentional targets of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So I think that is a really important difference. Furthermore, there have been terrorists who have been motivated by Iran, cells in the United States. We even had a couple of copycats, terrorists who wanted to carry out terrorist attacks on behalf of the Iranian regime. We have had the Iranians seek to assassinate those in the United States who were part of the efforts to take out other heads of militia who were outside of Iran trying to kill Americans in Iraq, for instance. So I think that is an important difference between the two of us. So I do take great issue with a country willing to kill Americans wherever they can reach them.
But they're in response to American actions, right?
That is, again, I do not believe that actions.
They view us as an occupying force in the region, and it's not just the Iranians. Hundreds of millions in the region believe that, and the idea that they have no right to respond, to engage in self-defense in any form is just something that isolates Americans and makes us look like complete pirates on the international stage.
Yes, and I think that you've made a nice case on behalf of Iran, but I'm making a case on behalf of the United States.
On behalf of Americans. This is not our business.
Let Rebeccah respond.
My position is that the United States of America is not the aggressor. I completely disagree with the characterization that we are, what did you call us? A pirate nation. You called us a mafia state. And I completely disagree with that. I believe that President Trump has been wrongly accused of breaking international norms and law, when in fact, I would argue that the United States finally taking out the Iranian nuclear program is defending the Non-Proliferation Treaty, of which the Iranians have been in violation of. President Trump has been incredibly consistent that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, that it would be intolerable for the United States to have such an ideologically motivated regime against not just the United States and Americans anywhere they can reach them, but our allies. We haven't even begun to talk about, I mean, you continue to push this notion that the Israelis pushed us into this war, and I couldn't disagree more strongly. I think that the Israelis have had different ideas about handle this problem for many years, and I think that we made a sovereign decision based on our own national security interests and have had an extremely competent ally work alongside us to handle the threat. But I do think that I think Curt still needs to answer the problem, because I think he's sort of made multiple and different and conflicting arguments about what kind of outcome we still want in the region and what to do with the regime. And I completely disagree with this idea. Again, Curt has simultaneously argued that this regime is not al-Qaeda, but he said that we are further hardening the regime by taking action against the regime. I don't know what that means ideologically. Again, my contention is it is already highly motivated to harm the United States, and the United States is taking away their capability to do that while seeking to empower leaders inside the country who are more pragmatic. And by the way, I didn't say they were moderate. I said I defined what I meant by that, which is more willing to take cost-benefit analysis and risk assessments. And I'm using the characterization from Secretary Rubio.
Yeah. Okay. I'll directly answer that if that works, Henry.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think by hardening the regime, it's to the extent that we understand this country far away with 90 million people, of which I think neither of us speak the language, to the extent that I understand it, it will look like this. They will conclude that the moderates, the previous presidents like Rouhani, the current president like Pezeshkian, were wrong in ever trying to engage with the United States and Europe. That was a mistake, that they should buy in whole hog to China, for better or worse. So this is a major civilization that we're going to put into Chinese access. And moreover, if we do care at all about the Iranian people, and I don't think the U.S. should make military decisions on their behalf, but if we do care about it, I think it's going to double down the repression apparatus within the society. And I think additionally, it's going to create a new generation, people who are in the 20s and 30s, who don't remember Iran, Iraq, who don't remember the Shah, who don't remember the secret police, who will understand that a fresh raison d'etre for the regime. And I think there are millions of people, and some will take different conclusions, but I think that is going to be the sweep of political opinion within the country. And I think they're going to rally around the son, if he survives, because of the martyrdom culture there. He lost not only his father, but his wife and several of his children, I believe. And you're going to see, basically a junta state with clerical characteristics that will run in that part of the world. It will be sort of a larger scale, different Shia Taliban, running Iran. And I think this was all avoidable. I think we could have shown that the Iranians, weren't going to be part of the American access, but could have been a neutral buffer state within the region between us and between the Russians and Chinese. And I think we took the off-ramp on that. I don't think we should have left JCPOA, but even if you think we should have left JCPOA, we could have gotten a deal that was better than JCPOA, in 24, in 25, in 26. And I commend President Trump for opening negotiations with the Iranians in the way that President Biden didn't. But the problem is he did both, in some ways, the most dovish thing by opening direct negotiations in all but name with the Iranians, and then assassinating their leader and bombing them, something that no president in American history had ever done. And so I just don't see what this is getting the United States. I don't see what this is getting Donald Trump. I don't see this is getting MAGA. And I think it is creating a more angry, more unstable population in the United States. And, I think it'll be fine for hawkish think takers who will just go back and try to, influence the next Republican administration. But for those who wanted something more from this administration. For those who think that the populist concerns in the population, both on the left and the right, are kind of tapping into something, I think this is another waste of resources, another waste of time. And I think it does matter generationally, if you look at it, just empirically, that the only people who are supporting this are older Americans. I think, I'm optimistic for the future of this country, but I worry about the amount of damage that can be done in the interim. Thank you.
So, Rebeccah, let me ask you a question. What do you think it will take for your outcome to occur with respect to the military pressure to bring the people who will calculate risk benefit more acceptably? Will it take some sort of internal civil war where the Artesh or some other entity that has some arms take on the IRGC? I mean, what will it take to get these people that you believe can make the sort of arrangement, removing the revolutionary nature of the Islamic Republic? What do you think will actually take within Iran to get them to power?
Yes, it's a great question. First, I would just say that one of the things I just want to note about Curt's last remarks is he states things as though they are true that are completely without evidence. It is not true, or at least we have no evidence that there could have been some sort of diplomatic deal in this year or that year or this year or that year that would have met the standards that's set by the United States of America from our own interests. In fact, we only have counter evidence. No deal was achieved. There was no deal that was achieved that fit the requirements for a good deal based on what President Trump and his national security team had assessed was necessary. So I think it's just important whenever you're debating, you cannot just assert things that are true that are completely without evidence.
It was more
and so that's really important. The other thing too, Henry, I would just...
Can we just let Curt respond to that directly?
The Iranians' opening offer was more stringent than the JCPOA on a number of metrics. So we turned down that offer. So you could argue it's not stringent enough. But if the goal was more stringent than JCPOA, then that was a deal we could accept because they literally offered it. Thanks.
Yeah, that was not the goal was not more stringent than JCPOA. The goal was a good deal. And we had certain criteria that was necessary to meet a good deal, as did President Obama. It's just that President Obama was willing to compromise, which is why individuals like Chuck Schumer didn't even support the original JCPOA based on the fact that it didn't meet the standards set by President Obama himself. So I think that that's just an important point. Henry, so I'll say a couple of things. This is what I think is going to be necessary. So I do think that there is a difference between the Artesh, the standing army, which is much more nationalistic, protective of Iran and its borders, different than the IRGC, which was there, very ideological and there to protect the regime. So I don't have inside knowledge on this, but there have been clues from CENTCOM Commander Admiral Cooper trying to encourage defections within the ranks. The fact that President Trump has even said in pressers that we've tried to avoid hitting some elements of the army, that would be the Artesh, because those people might be those that we might be willing to work with. We have incentivized significant rewards for defections or providing information on the heads of militia, upwards of $10 million for information we can use on the heads of militia. So I think that we are working very diligently with the Israelis who have penetrated the regime so much, even better than I think than we have. So to understand where those different elements potentially are, while at the same time eliminating those who are just fixated on the revolution and would value martyrdom over the good of the nation of Iran and the Iranian people. And of course, we don't have total clear knowledge on this, but the Iranian people going into this war were still very much, in general, pro-America and against the regime. And which is, of course, evidence not just through reporting or hearing from our own government officials, but because they were willing to go to the streets and sacrifice, obviously, even their lives to push back on and protest the regime. And I think that that's important because I think in the end, as administration officials have been clear, ultimately overthrowing this regime is going to require that's going to have to be the Iranian people over time to really, we're not going to engage in de-Baathification. So that's why this war is actually very different than previous wars in the Middle East. And that's going to be them. So the other thing I would just say is I do think in order to get the outcome I want in terms of wresting control of the Strait of Hormuz away from Iran, that is going to require us to internationalize the operations in the Strait. So we've seen some indications from both the French and the Brits that they're going to be willing to do defensive operations to make sure that the Strait of Hormuz stays open. I think that's going to be really important for that element of this conflict, to make sure that, again, we cannot end this war with Iran having control of the Strait or having some sort of toll booth set up, because ultimately that would mean that the Chinese obviously also have control of the Strait. So I think we're going to have to internationalize the effort. And I think the more we demonstrate to our allies that we can take away Iran's, even further degrade their ability to harm those ships in the Strait, the better. And then you're going to actually see, I think, a multinational effort to do that.
Curt, let me ask a kind of a wrap-up question for you, because we're coming to the end, and I want to give you the time, both of you, the time for your 2-minute closing. We do have allies in the region, not just the Israelis. We have the Saudis, who have been a long-time ally. Bahrain is headquarters for a fleet in the area, the United Arab Emirates. What do you think they want as an outcome to this war? And is it in the American interest to take their thoughts into account in deciding how to wind down and or end the war? Or do we have any interest in maintaining those alliances at all? Should we just leave the region and consequently leave it to its own devices?
Well, I think we've imperiled the alliances by this war. But is there any way, can I say very briefly on the protests?
You can speak. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just very briefly on the protest subject. So this is something where, like, I think the administration and the right-wing thinking throughout the United States, at least at a sort of institutional leadership level, has just gotten extremely sloppy. I mean, if Trump has been defined by anything, it has been by protest movements against him, right? And so if other countries used the same standards that we were using on the Iranians, that millions of Americans took to the streets, and the liberals would say that's against police violence. Conservatives might say that's anti-police, and you would conclude that millions of Americans are anti-police, and so majorities of Americans need to overthrow this vast yoke of a police architecture that's unacceptable. Same thing with ICE and immigration enforcement. If you just looked at remember just this year in January, if you looked at protests there, you would say Americans are against immigration enforcement. I think that's obviously it's a more dire situation in Iran. That's a much more authoritarian and autocratic society. But the idea, the sort of supposition that we have any right to tell these people how that they are governing their lives, and that even if we did, that if we could evolve ourselves and we can create a better world for them, but at the point of a gun, I think it's just something we need to break ourselves of, especially as Americans, decade after decade, say that our own country is going in the wrong direction. So I think we should focus on ourselves. As to your actual question on the Gulf, I think the Gulf is divided. So the Emiratis, I think, since the Abraham Accords and under the recent leadership of MBZ, have more or less become an Israeli carve-out. And so they want this war, and that's fine. They can advocate for it, and I think we shouldn't really listen to them. I think the Saudis have played a double game, but I think everybody else in the region didn't want the war. The Qataris, the Omanis have been doing their best to negotiate a peaceful settlement to this. It didn't work, but I credit them for trying. And so the idea that there's sort of unified Gulf interests, I think, is pretty well belied by just, investigating this a little bit. But I think, no, ultimately, we really shouldn't care what these people say. We should make our own determinations for ourselves. And we might find that if in sort of ruthlessly pursuing our own national interest and not trying to involve ourselves militarily in other parts of the world, that we might actually find that we have more friends. I reject, finally, the label that is sometimes described to our perspective, the magazine's perspective, the anti-war rights perspective, that we're isolationists. I think the real isolationists are the hawks, are the Israeli firsters. They're the ones that are isolating us from the rest of the world. This war is extremely unpopular internationally. It is destabilizing the international economy and system. We are isolated by doing these wars of choice. Thank you.
Okay, well, we run out of time for the questioning. We're going to have our 2 minutes of concluding statements done in reverse order. So that means, Rebeccah, you have 2 minutes, and then we'll turn to Curt for the final word. Rebeccah, you're up.
Sure. This is a debate that's supposed to be about two different ideas for conservatism from two people who are conservative. And so my question is always, I hope Curt will answer this in his closing remarks, what is it that you are conserving? Because what I'm conserving is American strength and power and our government's ability to protect the American people and the American way of life. I do not believe that it's in America's interest to permit highly ideological regimes to have the capability to harm, and not just harm Americans, but to coerce the United States to threaten our ability to move in the world on terms that benefit the American people. I reject the idea and the accusation that this war is, quote, Israel first. The United States under President Trump made a sovereign decision based on Americans' interests and what's good for us. I reject the idea that we have to listen to the dictates of the Islamic Republic and what they deem as necessary and good for them. I mean, I continue to hear this idea. Everything's relativistic. If the United States wasn't doing this or that, then we wouldn't have provoked our enemies. And the United States is really trying to defend the status quo, defend freedom of the seas, our ability to peacefully traverse international waters. And it is Iran, in this case, and its proxies that are threatening the United States and our core national security interests. And so I do believe that diplomacy has been tried again and again. I agree that diplomacy is always something that we should aim first, but diplomacy only works if it is backed by a credible threat of military force, and it cannot be a bluff. And so President Trump took great courage, I think, to demonstrate, again, American military capabilities, but also our military competence across the joint force and incredible will to execute this in defense of the United States. And I think it'll strengthen our hand in diplomacy.
Curt, the final word is with you.
Sure, I'll answer the question directly. I think conservatism is very simple. I mean, if it means anything in the American context, it means defending the ideals of the Declaration and the Constitution and the American founding. And I think there's a panoply of examples of that this is the kind of imperial overstretch that our founders would have rejected. That this has nothing to do with the United States. And at a spiritual level, Americans, with the exception of the Native Americans, came here to throw off the problems of the old world. And, we have found ourselves ineluctably driven back into solving these places that we know little about and don't understand. I think it is very easy to fall in the sort of Fox News trap of, weakness versus strength and, military versus diplomatic and sort of, MIC, military industrial complex jargon. But the reality is, why do we need to do this? Why is this in the U.S. national interest? I haven't heard anything new here from Rebeccah on that score. I've heard a lot of other interesting things that I will consider, but I have not heard why the Iranians were a direct threat to the United States. I have heard allusions that they were a threat to Israel, but I think they're only a threat to a certain conception of the Israeli state and its interests, which is to break apart everything in the region and allow no strength to come parallel to the Zionist enterprise. And that's fine, but that's not in the interest of the United States. As I've mentioned, this is isolating us and it's tearing us apart. This is something that is taking the oxygen up for this administration, which could have done a lot of good things. I think still could if it leaves today. But if it continues down this path, this is what Trump will be remembered for, which is really a shame, given everything else that has defined the Trump era. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Curt. Thank you, Rebeccah, and thank you, listeners. Please join me, Henry Olson, in another 2 weeks for the next episode of Conservative Crossroads. The topic, freedom or virtue? What is conservatism's cardinal principle? Take care.